The cave was so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat, and a whisper that didn't belong to me. They say that mountain spirits wander these depths, and strange lights lure people into a labyrinth that never lets go. I stood on the narrow stone passage, walls pressing in so close that my flashlight barely touched the dark corners, while its shadow danced across the uneven surfaces like a living creature. The cave looked empty, yet somehow it was full of expectation, as if something was waiting to appear at any moment. I had come here for professional curiosity. Geology, karst formations, bioluminescent minerals, everything was supposed to be simple research. But now, standing at its threshold, curiosity felt distant. Life was being watched. The locals had warned me. The Appalachian caves have their legends. People spoke of moving lights that appear on their own, of shadows that mimic a traveler's steps, and of those who ventured too far in, never to return. I had laughed at these stories when planning my expedition, but that laughter felt far away now, belonging to someone else. The air was damp and cold. Water droplets fell from the ceiling into small puddles, echoing in a way that distorted sound. I moved step by step, each footfall louder than it should have been. I scanned the walls with my light, noticing crystals and moss that glowed faintly green. They were natural, but I couldn't shake the feeling that their glow pulsed in rhythm with my rising anxiety. My hand trembled as I adjusted the flashlight battery, though the trembling didn't feel entirely mine. I took a few more steps and froze. A narrow tunnel to the right seemed impassable, yet something inside it flickered. At first, I thought it was just a reflection of my flashlight on the damp walls. Then I realized the light was moving in a direction opposite mine. It wasn't just dancing, it was moving forward, calling me. I stopped and listened. Silence returned almost completely, yet I could sense a presence. Not a human presence, but something else, invisible and aware. I remember the old tales of will-o'-the-wisps that lure people into caves. Locals said these lights draw lonely travelers into labyrinths where time halts, and the space itself forms traps. Then I heard it, a faint sound. Footsteps. They didn't echo mine. They were slightly delayed, like the afterimage of my shadow. My heart clenched. I was alone, and yet I wasn't. I tried to calm myself with rational explanations. Humidity, echo, nerves. But then I smelled something decayed, yet subtle, like the earth exhaling long-held secrets. A barely perceptible hint of sulfur lingered, and with it came the feeling of being watched. My steps slowed, careful, but I could sense someone or something tracking every movement. Suddenly, my flashlight froze on the wall. Where nothing should have been, a shadow appeared. It wasn't human, yet it mirrored my movements as if looking directly into my soul. I felt blood rush to my head, my hands shaking, not from cold. The shadow was slow, elusive, and intelligent. It reacted to my thoughts. I stepped back. The shadow stepped back. It crouched. Before we go any deeper, take a moment to leave a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from, and whether you've ever experienced anything like this yourself. If you enjoy the story, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I kept moving forward, never taking my eyes off the light pulsing somewhere ahead. Only a small part of my mind told me this was still an expedition, still scientific curiosity. Another part screamed, turn back while you still can. But I couldn't. Something unseen was keeping me here, drawing me deeper. I lost track of time. My footsteps on the rock became the only rhythm I could control. Everything else, whispers, lights, shadows, smells, and the sense of presence, belonged to the cave. In that moment, I understood that legends are never born from nothing. Mountain spirits, will-o'-the-wisps, creatures that mimic your fears. They were here, within these stone walls, and they weren't going to let me forget them. I lifted my flashlight, trying to illuminate the tunnel ahead. The light pulsed, and the shadow reappeared, now closer. I froze in terror and fascination at the same time. Then I made the most reckless move of all. I stepped into a narrow side passage that seemed pointless. The light barely reached the walls, and I felt it pulling me forward. And that's when I heard it, the first real scream. Not human, not animal, but something in between. It echoed from deep inside the cave, and I knew. I had entered the labyrinth that never lets go. The tunnels twisted and narrowed, the walls closing in like the cave itself was breathing around me. My flashlight flickered again, casting brief, trembling shadows that stretched and recoiled, as if alive. Every drip of water from the ceiling echoed too long, bouncing off the stone and multiplying, so that the sound seemed to come from every direction at once. My heart was pounding, and yet a part of me couldn't stop moving forward. The cave had a rhythm, and I had somehow fallen into it. I tried to remind myself that it was just geology, humidity, and imagination. But then the shadows shifted. Not a trick of the light, not an optical illusion. Something moved on its own, brushing the corner of my vision and vanishing when I turned my head. I froze, listening. There was again a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, like someone speaking just behind my ear, repeating fragments of my own thoughts. You are alone. No one will find you. And yet the air carried another sensation, subtle but undeniable. The faint, almost sweet smell of wet earth mixed with decay, the kind of scent that clings to the bones of a place for decades. I inhaled carefully, trying to steady myself, but it only made the hairs on my arms stand up. The cave was alive, not in a literal sense, but in every way that mattered. The way it responded to me, watched me, mirrored my fears. I paused, listening as the shadows seemed to stretch and twist around me, and the faint light pulsed like it had a heartbeat of its own. Take a moment. Have you ever felt a presence you couldn't explain? Comment below and share your experience. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Then I pressed on, deeper into the twisting tunnels, each step echoing louder than the last. The further I went, the more the legends of these caves pressed into my mind. Locals whispered about will-o'-the-wisps that trap travelers in endless passages, about mountain spirits that mimic your fears and force you to confront them, about shadow creatures that watch silently, learning, anticipating. I had thought these stories were just old warnings, the kind passed down to keep people cautious. Now, I wasn't so sure. A sudden drop in temperature made me shiver violently. My flashlight illuminated something unusual ahead, a cluster of faintly glowing moss, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers I was hearing. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the pattern was too deliberate, almost like a signal, a heartbeat matching my own. The shadows gathered near it, stretching taller, longer, leaning toward me. I felt a pull, a subtle tug that wasn't physical but emotional, a compulsion to move closer despite the fear gnawing at my mind. I thought about turning back. Every instinct screamed at me, retreat while you still can. But curiosity, or some darker force, kept me moving forward. The deeper I went, the more distorted the cave became. Walls seemed to bend in impossible ways. Passages looped back on themselves, and sounds carried farther than they logically could. Footsteps that weren't mine echoed from the depths, soft but deliberate, pacing me. Something was walking with me, following me, testing me. At one point, I stumbled into a small cavern, the ceiling low, jagged rock brushing my shoulders. I caught sight of movement in the corner of my eye. Two shadowy figures, too fleeting to make out clearly, but unmistakably there. They didn't move like humans. Their motions were too fluid, too deliberate. One seemed to glance at me, though I knew it had no eyes. My heart thumped painfully in my chest. I was terrified, and yet I couldn't look away. Then came the faint, eerie light again, drifting slowly across the cavern floor. It wasn't just illuminating, it was shaping, forming subtle outlines that resembled faces, hands, impossible shapes that shimmered and melted away before I could focus. The will-o'-the-wisps of legend? Perhaps. The mountain spirits, or shadows that copied your fears. Maybe. Whatever it was, I felt it studying me, learning me, testing how far I would go. I realized my sense of time had vanished. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps they were only seconds. My own thoughts felt slow, drawn out, almost viscous. I kept reminding myself, logical explanations, geological anomalies, light refraction. But even as I thought it, the shadows moved differently, deliberately, as if mocking my rationalizations. I felt my mind unraveling, the cave pressing against every certainty I had ever held. I came to a fork in the tunnel. One path led down, dark and narrow. The other curved slightly upward, lighter but filled with strange echoes. The pulsing light hovered over the downward path, almost beckoning me. I hesitated, then took a deep breath and stepped toward it. The shadows seemed to surge in response, flowing around me like liquid darkness. My breath came in shallow gasps. I could hear my heartbeat loud in my ears, but it wasn't mine alone. The cave's rhythm had merged with mine. Suddenly, the whisper returned, closer now, almost in my ear. Follow the light, or be left behind. The tone wasn't threatening. It was insistent, seductive, unavoidable. I froze, my body trembling, yet my feet kept moving forward, drawn to the glow like a moth to a flame. Every instinct I'd screamed to run, yet I felt compelled, trapped in a slow, deliberate march deeper into the unknown. And then I saw it, faint at first, barely visible, a shape hovering just beyond the light. Not solid, not entirely shadow, but unmistakably aware. It mimicked my stance, my movements, even my hesitation. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and the shape shifted, pulsing like the cave itself had heartbeat. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized. This wasn't just light or shadow. It was intelligence. I pressed onward, each step an act of defiance and curiosity intertwined. The whispers grew louder, echoing fragments of my own fears, memories, and regrets. I was no longer merely exploring a cave. I was walking into a labyrinth of my own mind, where the walls responded to me, the shadows learned me, and the light guided me deeper into something that had been waiting for centuries. The tunnel narrowed even further, forcing me to squeeze my shoulders against the rough, damp rock. Every step echoed, but it wasn't just my own footsteps now. There were others soft and deliberate, sometimes lagging behind, sometimes keeping pace. The shadows clung to the walls, stretching unnaturally, twisting in ways no ordinary light could explain. I could feel them brushing against me, not physically, but mentally, probing, testing. My flashlight flickered again, and in that instant, I saw a figure, or what I thought was a figure, move across the wall. It wasn't human, but it moved like it had awareness. Every instinct screamed at me to run, yet my feet stayed rooted, trembling. The whispers returned, louder this time, forming words I didn't consciously think, but somehow understood. You can't leave. You are part of this now. The cave wasn't just responding to me. It was alive in a way that mocked all reason. I recalled the stories the locals told about will-o'-the-wisps that trapped travelers forever and shadow people that mirrored your every fear. I had laughed at them before, but now every tale seemed plausible. Every stone, every flicker of light, every echo carried intent. I rounded a bend and stumbled into a larger chamber, where the ceiling opened up slightly. Faint phosphorescent moss clung to the jagged rocks, casting an eerie green glow. At first, it seemed harmless, even beautiful, but the light pulsed like a heartbeat in sync with my own, or maybe it was forcing my heartbeat into its rhythm. And then I saw movement in the periphery, dozens of shadowy figures, all of them mimicking my stance, my trembling hands, my cautious steps. They weren't solid. They weren't fully there, but they were aware, and they were waiting. Panic rose in me. My rational mind tried to cling to science. It's a trick of the light. Your mind is playing games. But the cave didn't care about reason. The whispers grew, layering over each other, fragments of my own fears and regrets. Alone, lost, forgotten. Every word was a needle pricking at the edges of my sanity. I stumbled backward and nearly fell over a jagged rock. My flashlight spun wildly in my hand, illuminating fragments of the chamber in a strobe of green and shadow. That's when I realized the shapes weren't just shadows. They were extensions of the light itself. Each flicker reshaped them, formed faces, limbs, impossible forms that twisted and melted before I could comprehend them. The legends were alive. The will-o'-the-wisps weren't just lights. They were predators, guiding me, teaching me fear. I backed toward the tunnel I had entered, but it had changed. The walls had shifted subtly, the passage narrower, more labyrinthine. The cave was no longer a physical space. It was a reflection of my own mind, a living, breathing entity that knew me, understood me, and could manipulate every sense. My flashlight flickered again, and I saw the shadows move closer, converging, stretching, pulsing. They were intelligent. I was prey in their awareness. I slowed my breathing, trying to focus, and then the whisper returned, now directly behind me. Do you see us? You're already part of us. I spun around, but there was nothing or nothing tangible. Just the shadows, just the pulsing green light, just the whispers that crawled under my skin. Every step I took forward was mirrored by a shadow, every hesitation noted. The cave was aware of me. Then the floor beneath me shifted. Not physically, it was more subtle, almost imperceptible, like the ground itself had a rhythm, a pulse I had to match. If I stumbled, if I misstepped, I felt it would notice and the shadows would react. I realized with a jolt, the labyrinth was alive, sentient, and it fed off my fear. My rational mind fought it, but my body was obeying some unspoken compulsion. I came to a fork. One tunnel descended further, black and impossibly narrow. The other rose slightly, dimly illuminated by the pulsing green moss. The downward tunnel shadows seemed heavier, more focused, waiting. My gut screamed to turn around, but the upward path had a strange allure, an almost sentient pull that promised answers, or perhaps more danger. I chose the upward path. As I moved, the whispers intensified, forming syllables I couldn't fully comprehend. They were a mixture of familiar and alien, human and not. I caught snippets: fear, alone, lost, follow. My footsteps echoed in rhythm with the pulses of light, creating a terrifying harmony that seemed to resonate inside my chest. I felt my heartbeat sync with it, as if the cave itself had claimed ownership of my body. And then I saw it, a faint figure at the far end of the tunnel, flickering in and out of existence. Not fully shadow, not fully light, it mirrored my movements almost perfectly. It wasn't waiting for me, it was anticipating me. Every pause I took, every step forward, it adjusted. My stomach churned. I wanted to flee, but I felt my legs move forward regardless. The pull was irresistible. The figure flickered again, and I noticed that with every pulse of light, it grew slightly closer, more defined. It wasn't just mimicking me, it was learning, adapting. And then I realized something that froze my blood. The shadows weren't just outside me. They were inside me. My own fear, my own hesitation were feeding them, giving them form. The upward tunnel twisted sharply, and suddenly I was in a chamber where the ceiling was lost in darkness. The pulsing light now filled the room, illuminating dozens of shapes in impossible angles. Faces emerged from walls, fleeting and distorted. Limbs appeared and vanished. The air vibrated with whispers, low and high, each echoing fragments of my deepest fears. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I stumbled forward, tripping over roots and jagged rock. Each fall was mirrored by a shadow. Every gasp recorded and echoed back at me. I realized then, with utter clarity, the cave doesn't just trap you. It knows you. It learns you. And it waits for you to make the mistake that will make you part of it forever. I had gone deeper than any caution, any story, any legend warned me about. And in that moment, I understood that the labyrinth wasn't just stone and darkness. It was a predator, patient and eternal, feeding on curiosity, fear, and the soul of anyone who dared enter. The tunnel opened into a larger cavern, but it wasn't a safe space. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, vanishing into darkness, while jagged stalactites hung like teeth. The green phosphorescent moss pulsed rhythmically, illuminating the chamber in irregular flashes. Shadows swirled across the walls, independent of my flashlight, moving with intent, bending in ways that defied geometry. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but I was rooted, part of the cave's rhythm now. I could hear whispers all around me, a cacophony of voices both human and not, repeating fragments of my fears. Alone, lost, not safe. They weren't just words, they were vibrations, threading into my mind, pressing against my thoughts. The shadows responded, converging, stretching toward me like liquid darkness. I realized with a jolt, they weren't just watching, they were testing me, learning my limits. I stepped forward, and the floor seemed to pulse beneath my feet, faintly, like a heartbeat. Not mine, but something ancient, something patient. The cave itself was aware, reacting to every movement, every decision. I remembered the tales of Appalachian caves, the will-o'-the-wisps that lure wanderers, the spirits that copy fears, the shadow people that mimic your very soul. Every legend was coming alive, wrapping around me like a living trap. Then I saw movement at the far edge of the chamber. Not just shadows this time. Figures humanoid but distorted, flickering between visibility and darkness. They moved with deliberate grace, watching me, waiting for me to make a wrong move. My flashlight's beam shook in my hand. I could feel them. No, I could sense them, an intelligence behind the darkness that studied me with each step I took. I stumbled backward, almost falling into a fissure. The figures mirrored my hesitation instantly, stretching their forms to match every twitch, every nervous breath. The cave pulsed with energy, alive in a way that left no doubt. It fed on fear, curiosity, and doubt. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. My voice seemed swallowed by the stone, leaving only the whispers, circling, persistent, unrelenting. I turned a corner, trying to find a narrower passage, some exit, but the walls had shifted. Tunnels looped impossibly, twisting back on themselves. The ceiling seemed closer, yet the chamber expanded ahead, as if breathing. I felt a tug, an almost physical pull, toward the center of the cavern, toward the flickering green moss that now pulsed violently. My instincts screamed against it, but my body obeyed, drawn into the cave's intent. And there, hovering just above the moss, was a figure more defined than any shadow I had seen. Its edges were fluid, light and darkness intertwined, yet I could make out a face, or at least the suggestion of one. It mirrored me perfectly, every nervous breath, every twitch of my hands. I realized with a growing horror, it wasn't just a shadow. It was me, but sharper, darker, something forged from fear itself. Quick pause for you. If you've ever been somewhere that felt alive, where the darkness seemed to watch, comment below. Tell me what you would do if you were in my place. Hit that like button and subscribe to see how far this goes. I took a step closer, almost involuntarily, and the figure advanced in perfect harmony with me. The moss pulsed faster, shadows stretching across the walls like living arms, echoing every heartbeat. Whispers merged into one sound, low and insistent. Join us. Become part of this. I tried to shake my head, to pull away, but my body moved of its own accord. The cave had claimed me, bending my senses, distorting my perception. The walls twisted impossibly, the ceiling shifted, and the light pulsed so bright it felt like a heartbeat inside my skull. I realized then that escape wasn't just difficult, it might be impossible. Suddenly, the floor beneath me shuddered. A fissure opened slightly, the air rushing up cold and damp. I saw movement in the darkness below. Shadowy forms climbing, slipping, creeping along surfaces I didn't think were walkable. They were alive, intelligent, deliberate, and now they were converging on me. The whispers intensified, overlapping, forming words I didn't consciously understand, yet my mind knew them. You cannot leave. You are ours. Forever. I stumbled back again, my flashlight swinging wildly. Shapes formed from the light. Faces, hands, impossible limbs reaching toward me. Panic gripped me fully. The cave was no longer just stone and darkness. It was predator, sentient and patient, and I was prey. I turned, desperate to retreat, but the passage I had entered had vanished. Walls that were solid moments ago, now shifted like liquid rock. The shadows twisted, merging, flowing toward me in waves, and I understood with absolute clarity. The cave wasn't just alive. It was hunting me, learning me, shaping itself around my fear. Every instinct screamed to flee, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped, yet aware, conscious of every movement, every heartbeat. And as the figure approached, mirroring my terror perfectly, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. I had ventured into something that did not belong to the world of men, a labyrinth older than any memory, alive with light and shadow, and it would not release me willingly. The deeper I went, the more the cave became unrecognizable. Tunnels twisted impossibly, walls shifted as though they had minds of their own, and shadows clung to every corner, independent of light or logic. My flashlight flickered violently, illuminating glimpses of shapes that should not have existed. Elongated limbs, faces that melted into the stone, eyes that glimmered in impossible angles. Each step forward felt like a surrender, yet every fiber of me screamed to turn back. Whispers filled the cavern now, overlapping and layering, forming sentences that chilled me to the bone. You cannot leave. We are everywhere. Follow or be lost. I tried to block it out, but the sound penetrated deeper than my ears. It pressed in my mind, a mental echo that mimicked my own thoughts. I stumbled, my flashlight nearly slipping from my grip. The shadows responded instantly, surging closer, flowing across the walls like liquid darkness, reflecting not only my movements, but my fears, my regrets, my deepest guilt. I rounded a bend and froze. The chamber ahead was enormous, the ceiling vanishing into a black abyss. Green light from the moss pulsed violently, illuminating dozens of forms hovering in the distance. They were humanoid but distorted, flickering between substance and shadow. Each one mirrored my posture, my breathing, my hesitation. They were not just watching, they were learning, anticipating, shaping themselves to my every instinct. Panic gripped me fully. I tried to reason, to remind myself of logic, of science, of the world outside. But every rational thought collided with the undeniable fact. The cave was alive. It was aware, and it fed on my fear. Every heartbeat, every anxious thought, every hesitation gave it strength. The shadows began moving toward me in unison, not slowly, deliberately, confidently, as though they knew the exact point where I would falter. My flashlight swung wildly, illuminating faces, hands, impossible shapes that appeared and vanished with every flicker. I realized with a sinking horror that I was no longer navigating the cave. It was navigating me. I stumbled into another narrow tunnel, hoping to escape, but the passage shifted behind me, walls closing in subtly enough that I didn't notice at first. The whispers intensified, wrapping around me, layering my own thoughts into their rhythm, alone. Lost. Ours. I could feel the shapes pressing closer, not physically, but mentally, like the air itself had weight. And then I saw it, my shadow, or what I thought was mine. It moved independently, slightly ahead of me, mirroring every thought, every hesitation, every twitch. It didn't belong to me. It was smarter, faster, predatory. I realized that the cave had created it, shaped it from my fear and doubt, and now it was leading me somewhere. I had no choice but to follow. I forced myself forward, stepping over jagged rock, squeezing through narrow gaps, every motion mirrored by the shadow ahead. The whispers now weren't just words. They were a pressure, a presence, insinuating themselves into my very thoughts. I could no longer distinguish reality from hallucination. Every flicker of light, every echo, every shadow was alive, sentient, aware of me. I entered a chamber where the ceiling opened into an abyss of darkness. The moss pulsed violently, shadows stretching down like tendrils. And there, hovering in the center, was the figure again, the one I had glimpsed before. Not fully shadow, not fully light, but unmistakably aware, almost intelligent. It mirrored me perfectly, every breath, every tremor of fear. I could see my own expression on it, twisted, distorted, exaggerated. I understood then, the cave had cloned me, not my body, but my fear, my hesitation, my very essence. I tried to turn, to run, but my legs moved toward it regardless, pulled by some invisible force. The shadows surged, wrapping around my senses, the whispers now deafening. You belong to us. Forever. I felt myself weakening, the boundary between me and the cave dissolving. My mind screamed, my body obeyed, and the figure came closer, pulsing with every heartbeat, matching me perfectly. I thought of every legend I had dismissed. the-wisps, mountain spirits, shadow people. Every story was true, or at least some terrifying variation of the truth. They weren't merely warnings. They were instructions for survival, or perhaps for surrender. And now I was part of the experiment, the labyrinth, the living cave. I stumbled, fell, and the shadows closed in, but not with violence. It was subtle, invasive. They pressed against my senses, enveloped my perception, and I understood that escape was no longer a matter of movement. It was a matter of will. Could I unlearn fear? Could I separate myself from the cave? Or had I already become part of it? I scrambled to my feet, every motion mirrored, tested, judged. The light pulsed brighter, faster, echoing in my chest, as if syncing with my very heart. The shadows converged, forming a swirling mass, stretching upward, downward, in every direction at once. And then the whispers, simplified, singular, insistent. Accept it. You are ours. I stopped. My mind reeled, my body frozen. For a long moment, the cave waited, breathing with me, pulsing with me. And in that silence, I realized that survival no longer meant running. It meant understanding, adapting, confronting. But even as I stood there, the shadows reached for me, and I understood one undeniable truth. I was not alone. I never had been. And the cave, it never forgets. I stood frozen in the chamber, surrounded by shadows that moved with purpose, pulsing light that seemed to breathe, and whispers that pressed against every thought. The figure, the shadow version of myself, floated just ahead, perfectly mirroring my fear, my hesitation, my very heartbeat. The cave had learned me. I was no longer exploring it. It was exploring me, shaping me, testing me. I thought of retreat, of turning around and running. But the tunnels had shifted again. The paths I had taken were gone, replaced by impossible loops, walls that bent and stretched as if the cave itself were alive. Every instinct screamed that escape was futile. The will-o'-the-wisps, the spirits of the mountains, the shadow people. They were real, and I was caught in their labyrinth. I pressed forward anyway, moving toward the pulsing light, toward the shadow that was me, but not me. Each step was deliberate. A surrender and defiance rolled into one. The whispers had become a roar in my mind, echoing every fear I had ever held. You are alone. You belong to us. You cannot leave. Then the green light intensified, illuminating shapes I couldn't comprehend. Faces twisted in stone, limbs that bent impossibly, shadows that reached and recoiled in tandem with my own movements. And yet, somewhere beneath the fear, there was a strange clarity. The cave had a pattern, a rhythm. It wasn't just chaos. It was alive, and it had rules. I had to follow them. I stumbled into a narrow crevice, the walls pressing so close I could feel the rough stone on my shoulders. My shadow clone mirrored me perfectly, floating just ahead, guiding me towards some unknown center of the labyrinth. I could no longer tell what was real and what was a reflection of my own mind. Every thought, every hesitation, every pulse of fear was magnified, reflected, consumed. For a moment, I stopped and tried to scream, but no sound came. The cave had claimed my voice, leaving only the whispers, wrapping me in a blanket of cold awareness. I realized something terrible. Even if I found a physical exit, the labyrinth would follow me. It didn't exist only in stone. It existed in the mind, in the fear, in the memory of every traveler who had entered and been shaped by it. I took a step forward, and the shadow mirrored me. Another step. It was learning me faster than I could anticipate. The whispers became clearer, singular, insistent. You are ours. You have always been ours. My mind screamed in protest, but my body obeyed the pull of the light, the pulse, the figure that was me but not me. Then the cavern opened into a vast space, endless, black, stretching into nothing. The shadows surged, the light pulsed violently, and the whispers coalesced into a single truth I could not deny. The cave never lets go. Those who enter, those who succumb to curiosity and fear, become part of it. Part of the labyrinth. Part of the echoes. Part of the shadows. I took a final step, swallowed by the pulsing green glow. The shadow mirrored me perfectly, then merged, then disappeared into the darkness. The whispers softened, leaving only one lingering impression. We remember. We wait. We watch. And then there was silence. I did not know how long I stood there. Minutes? Hours? Or eternity? Time had no meaning. The cave seemed still, but I knew better. Somewhere deep within, it was alive, patient, waiting for the next traveler, the next curiosity, the next fear. And though I emerged, if I truly did, I carried it with me, the shadow of its presence, the memory of its pulse, the whisper in the back of my mind that never stops. The labyrinth never lets go.